Hello everyone, and welcome on back to the channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today I'm going to be going over two trait lines where I have made some fan changes. Now these changes aren't necessarily in regards to tackling the whole entire balance idea, though this is more so in an effort of creative exploration and bumping up certain aspects of Guardian which might have gone long untouched. Especially with recent balance in the direction that balance is going in, it has influenced some of my ideas, but I'm mostly doing this because Guardian hasn't received updates in a long time, and I'm not really talking about nerfs. I'm talking more so general ideas and gameplay changes to keep it up to speed, or just keep it fresh. So don't get too wrapped up in any numbers that you see here, as I tend to not in most cases, and I'm really just going for the overall theme and feeling of these two trait lines. Of course, being a support player, the first two trait lines that I'm going to be sharing are Valor and Honor. We're going to be starting with Honor. Now for Honor, this trait line is your healing support trait line, so I'm really leaning into it, and I think that this could be a philosophy with looking at each trait lines as their own roles, and it could perhaps increase streamlining builds and also balance. So when looking at the Honor trait line, I really wanted to focus in on that pure healer support idea. First up, we have Protective Reviver. Cast Lesser Shield of Absorption when you begin reviving an ally. The detonation of the spell revives allies, and additionally, your resurrection effectiveness is increased. I wanted to put a little bit more weight in playing a Guardian reviving allies and not needing to rely on your shield, and the Lesser Shield of Absorption is more so a added benefit when you are reviving. I think having players commit to pressing F on a downed player is a nice trade-off, but having a slight increase to reviving would be nice. Next up, I have changed the bottom minor trait into Clerical Restoration. This used to place a symbol of protection when you use a heal skill. I like the idea of an ability providing an effect upon a heal skill, but I want this to maybe be a little bit more heal focused. So Clerical Restoration on a 15-second cooldown. When you use your heal skill, heal allies around you and grant them vigor. I was kind of inspired by the Druid trait where when you use your healing ability, you heal allies around you and your pet, though I wanted to provide a little bit more boon application with vigor. So that's what I've done with Clerical Restoration. You don't really have to sit in a location, it's more of an instant activation type situation. And moving on, we have Pure of Heart. Regeneration you apply heals for more, and healing a target that has regen is more effective. I like traits that are a little bit more simple and don't have paragraphs tied to them. And with Guardian, we currently don't have any trait that bolsters regeneration. And if you're going to be a healer, you oftentimes will be applying regeneration. And there's a few other healing specializations that play around with this boon and improve it, because regeneration doesn't scale all too well based off of your own healing power, so having this perhaps with Guardian could be useful. The added benefit of your flat healing being increased by additional 5% against or with targets that have regen could also be a little extra. Next up, we have Hardy Guard. I am changing the bottom trait for the master tier. Blocking or evading an attack barriers allies in the area and grants them protection. This is kind of bleeding into the bruisery control idea of defending your allies, and this is more so in a concept of pairing Valor and Honor together, so having a little bit of extra barrier is maybe a different way of supporting allies, and is a bit more of active defending rather than reactive healing. Next up, and for the final trait in this rework for Honor, I'm thinking about Writ of Persistence, and I've renamed it to Writ of the Ages. Considering that support builds oftentimes need alacrity tied to them to be useful, unless you're Scourge and you have incredible resurrection potential. Alacrity, in my opinion, should be a more common boon to support traits and support specializations in general. Now, do I think that this should be a permanent source of alacrity? No. So that is why I've changed Rid of Persistence into Rid of the Ages, where your symbols still heal allies and last longer, but placing a symbol applies 1 packet of alacrity in a larger area, this only being 1 second. I view this as more of a rebuffing of that specific boon. Instead of applying large amounts of a buff or a boon, you instead take traits or certain abilities that just make sure that they continue to roll on allies around you or in a particular area. I think this wouldn't be necessarily a scary trait in terms of, oh, you're crossing the streams of quickness and alacrity potentially, because this would only be on the symbol application and it would only be 1 second. So you really couldn't get permanent alacrity out of this no matter how much concentration you had, as you oftentimes only have 2 symbols available to you. So I would like to maybe see a little bit of alacrity or some play style where you're able to buff up the duration of certain boons. Next up, let's talk about Valor. Now, Valor is a trait line that I find to be just rife with potential and so many things that you could do with Valor. And I dislike Aegis a lot, so you might be wondering what the hell I did. So I got rid of Aegis in this specialization in this trait line, and instead played more around with active blocking. I find Aegis to be rather boring in terms of a boon, as it's more so defending you for 1 hit. It can be applied by a few classes, and you oftentimes don't have agency or really know when it's being applied to you, or when it's actually going to attack, other than when you're in comms doing a specific raid. But I like the idea of more active blocking and more active defense rather than relying on an easy 1 block boon. So I've changed it to revolve more around blocks and evasions. So first up, we have Valeris Defense. This is your first minor. Block attacks for a duration when you are struck below the health threshold. This duration would be less than a second, but it would proc at 50% health on a much longer cooldown, as this would allow you to block multiple attacks within that time frame rather than getting 1 block when you get below a health threshold. So I'm much more interested in a short duration, you block a few attacks, but on a much longer cooldown. Next up, for another minor, we have Steadfast Courage. This currently gives you protection when you block an attack via Aegis. I find that to be a little limited, so I've updated this, gain protection when you block an attack in general, no matter what. So if you have utility skills or weapon abilities that allow you to block, you would gain protection. Next up, for the traits that you actually have to take, I'm looking at Strength of the Fallen. I don't like this trait because it plays with the down state, and you don't really want to be going into downstate anyways, so I've changed this to Strength of the Many. Incoming healing from allies is improved, but I've remained and retained the lose a condition every interval portion of the trait. This would allow you to kind of be able to rely more on your teammates to heal you up if you are in tight situations. Next up, changed Focal or Focus Mastery into Focal Target. Focus Mastery, kind of bland, in my opinion, so I've just updated it. Taunt you apply lasts longer, and you receive less damage from taunted foes. In competitive modes, this would read as slow. I find Valor and many of the other bruiser tank specializations for the professions to lack a sense of control or taunt, and I think in PvE settings, I love taunt so much, so I'm always a big proponent of it. This would be very similar to an old Revenant trait where your taunt just applies, taunts that you apply last longer, and you receive less damage from foes that have taunt on them. Next up, we have Stalwart Defender. Gain toughness and additional toughness while wielding a shield. Shield of Judgment now taunts foes hit. In competitive modes, this would be slow. Currently, Stalwart Defender gives you 240 toughness if you are wielding a shield. There were splits with these types of traits that gave you attributes to where you would gain power and then gain additional power based on a certain weapon that you're wielding. They didn't do that with Stalwart Defender, which I'm not a huge fan of. So I've decided to take it upon myself to do that. I've also bumped up the total amount of toughness from a maximum of 240 if you're wielding a shield, up to 280, so just a little bit more. And then the other part of this trait, instead of reducing the cooldowns, I wanted to then have an application of taunt to play with the previous trait. So you're able to now taunt foes with your Shield of Judgment. I'm now getting into the area where I am flipping and flopping and having more fun with traits and maybe making more creative decisions that might be a bit more bold. The next trait I'm going to be talking about right now is called Communal Defenses. I don't see many people ever really taking it, so I have decided to revamp it into Knowledge of Defense. Defiance damage you deal to break bars is increased. Dealing strike damage against foes with barrier or the exposed effect is improved. This would really make you a much stronger break bar destroyer in raiding scenarios and strike scenarios, even in open world, and it would give you a little bit extra damage when you are fighting a foe that you have successfully broken or in competitive modes have barrier on them. So this is a little bit more of an aggressive tank playstyle where you are actively controlling the enemy a bit more effectively than if you did not have this trait selected. So Communal Defenses, I have swapped to Knowledge of Defense. Next up, Monk's Focus. I find Monk's Focus to be a little too aggressive for the Specialization line of Valor, though I do like its idea of boosting allies around you. So I've just changed a boon in this trait. So Monk's Focus, meditation skills heal you and grant resistance to allies on use. I'm just kind of interested in maybe playing around with resistance more often in competitive modes. This would allow players to make sure that their teammates are able to get to their targets or escape if they need to. Even in PvE scenarios, this would make it to where a mob, cripple, chill, they don't really have much of an effect on your allies, which is still pretty nice. And next up, we have a bigger change to Tenacious Defense. Tenacious Defense, I like a lot because it reduces your F3, but I think that there could be more to this trait, especially because Monk's Focus is super strong and always taken. So Tenacious Defense, blocking attacks recharges the cooldown of Virtue Skill 3, and strikes foes around you. Gain power based on a percentage of your toughness. There is a trait in Zeal called Mystic Rebuke, and it plays off of blocking. I find this idea to better suit Valor rather than Zeal. Zeal tends to be a bit more active aggression, you're actively fighting and striking targets. But with Valor, Valor is always about blocking and defenses. So I think that having a little bit of damage application on blocks would fit Valor better than Zeal. I've kept the recharge of Virtue Skill 3 as well, just because I like that a lot. And I added a little bit more to increase your power. So if you happen to be a tank in a raid, perhaps a strike mission, and you have a lot of toughness, you then further increase the amount of damage you're doing so that you are just helping the group out in fights. I've kind of combined Tenacious Defense and Mystic Rebuke and just kind of smushed them into one trait. I think that would probably feel a lot better and be more competitive towards Monk's Focus and even altruistic healing. So those are my 2 trait line revamps that I'm sharing today. I have a few other trait lines that I'm considering and looking at in terms of perhaps what I would like to see for the specializations of Guardians, simply because we haven't really received reworks in a long time. And that's not to say that Guardian needs a rework. It's more so just, how could Guardian be updated a little bit to keep it a little bit more fresh and bring some more consistent logic to its trait lines? And I think that consistent logic idea could be applied to all professions, honestly. So thank you everyone so much for coming. Like the video if you liked it, comment down below your thoughts about these 2 trait lines, and even contemplate some of my ideas here. Once again, don't get too wrapped up in the numbers, I would say, but I would love to hear from you down below. If you'd like to get early access to these videos and additional videos, head over to the Patreon. If you want to catch me on Twitch, I stream there every day. And if you'd like to try Guild Wars 2 or purchase it, I have links down below. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye everyone!